Hey everyone, welcome to the Data Octagon at the Data Innovation Summit 2022. I'm super excited. The pressure and the excitement and the vibe here is high. We have an awesome panel to kick off the event. We're going to be talking about going from a traditional to an algorithmic business, and we have some really nice panelists with us to talk about that today. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to ask everybody to introduce yourselves. Please start with yourself here.
Ruggiero. I work for Databricks. I run our field engineering team for Northern Europe, and I work with a team of data engineers and data scientists to help our customers understand how they would use our technology to solve their business problems.
And my name is Björn Hertzberg. I'm head of data science at Accenture, and we essentially create the AI models that are then scaled out through the business to help solve any challenges that we have in the organization.
My name is Gaetano Ruggiero. I work in Poste Italiane as a solution architect, and I'm primarily focused on data architectures.
Awesome. All right, so let's get it off. I'm going to give you guys a little anecdote here, and I want to get sort of your feedback to sort of start off the conversation. The term algorithmic business sort of came up at this event for the first time last year, and people are talking about it. And it seems to me like when these terms come up at the conference, it takes about a year, and then they start getting put into practice. And algorithmic business in particular was a very abstract term. And I think the way it's reflected now in technology is we see a lot of focus on like data mesh and that kind of stuff from a technology perspective, and then algorithmic business is more sort of an organizational aspect of it. And my anecdote here is that I introduced the idea of feature freezes to a company that was looking to deploy a technology, and they thought it was a very neat idea. But obviously, for us that are more familiar with software development, we know what a feature freeze is. And this company was very surprised because they hadn't thought of themselves as a software company. But it was quite obvious that information and data was central to their decision making. And so they started rethinking, maybe we are a data company, and maybe we need to be thinking in those terms. In your experience now, are people coming to that kind of a realization? Is that actually a transformation, or are we just using different words for the same thing now? What do you say, Emma?
That's an interesting question. I think, when we speak to customers or clients about this,
Okay.
clients realize that, whatever their sort of core business is, it all sort of evolves around data.
Yeah.
So I think that realization, that's not something we have to work with our clients to understand.
Mm-hmm.
They're perfectly well aware of that. So.
They've realized it and they call you in.
Yeah.
Okay, and is this the same with you at Databricks? Where do you enter the picture, and have clients already realized that kind of thing?
So actually, I would say pretty much every business out there is an algorithmic business today. Like we were just talking before this about the most effective way of delivering parcels. So there are many companies who have been using algorithms in business for decades. That's just been a core part of their business function.
Right.
And they've built their business around that. It could be like credit risk in financial services based on algorithms. But now we're talking more about AI and machine learning. But actually there's a link between the two. And now they're thinking, hey, how do we transform our business to make best use of these new approaches? Well, actually, you've got an idea of how you've done that based back here. So it's not brand new. Greenfield would not done it before. Sometimes they can look inward and say, how did we build ourselves around this in the first place?
What do you say, Björn?
Yeah, I actually was kind of surprised when you said it was something that popped up last year. I saw this term used in a Gartner report like 10 years ago or something like that, and it actually it helped me shape how I think about sort of innovation in a company. And one of the things that I've started saying internally is that for me, at least, sort of data is really just a copy of the real world. So yeah, I mean, all companies that are interested in their optimization or anything like that, they're using data, and it's a copy of sort of their processes, what they're doing. They're saving that type of data. And when you use that in a algorithmic sense, that you've codified your processes, then and finance have been pretty big in this, like trading and sort of credit scoring, all of these things. So they are really algorithmic business without a doubt.
Well, you guys have done a tremendous journey in that, in the
Yeah.
codification of the processes. I think that is probably one of the central things that differentiates, data-driven decision-making and algorithmic business. I think we should let's put a pin in that and do one more circle around it, because I think the codification of the processes is quite central.
Yeah.
I mean, what's your experience in terms of the mindset?
Well, we also trying to approach the digital transformation using a computational model. So we have a huge amount of data that we collect from several different business opportunity, and we already leverage on some artificial intelligence model to deliver some insights from what we cannot perceive from normal human interactions. But the next step we need to follow is to complete the transformation, adding some more computational step just after, in order to improve the business decision that the human is trying to seek.
Yeah.
So at the moment, what we are trying to achieve is first a more scalable and efficient ecosystem, analytical ecosystem. We are trying to transition from a monolithic data warehouse to a distributed mesh. So I think this is the prerequisite to have an efficient ecosystem that can drive faster business transformation, leveraging of analytical model also for improving the business transformation and business decisions.
You're going to have to help me to remember some of this, because there are a couple of interesting threads where we can take this. I think one thing you said here that's super interesting is sort of the step from deriving insights from AI and analytics to allowing it to control things and steer things on its own, which would be where one would imagine the ultimate algorithmic business would be, is one that's steered entirely by the algorithms, where we don't have people, deciding how much to buy based on a sales forecast that maybe was generated by an AI, but the AI would also place the order and that kind of thing. Yes. But if we go back then to the codifying of business processes, I imagine that's something that Accenture is quite familiar with, and sort of understanding business processes as such. How much of the kind of engagements that you're involved in, do people, are they mature enough that they start asking you questions there, or have they sort of skipped ahead and said, we need to build this machine?
I think there's both type of clients. We see some of them, they talk very much further ahead than where they are. You kind of have to bring them a little bit back and start smaller to kind of set the foundation to be able to scale to that.
Can you give an example? Like I understand what you're saying, and I think it might not be obvious to people when they are speaking in that way.
But of course, but I think, one main topic, like if we just simplify it, is, I think everyone talks about, using AI, machine learning, and they want to, use that on their processes and want to scale it and make fast decisions, etc. But they may not even have, harmonized business processes that they want to implement this at. And then you kind of have to bring it back. So it's like, okay, you have to maybe start there and look at your processes. Yeah. And are they even, fit for like AI, machine learning? Is there a value in using that on those processes? Because I think, they go to these seminars, they hear about it, they start thinking, how can we apply that to our business? Yeah. But maybe they need to, start with also like a value case or business case and see where do we best apply it? Yeah.
I wonder if, if we're talking about business processes, that's quite central to the business. And I think what a lot of people see here are, image recognition models, and then they go back to their business and they're like, do we have any images that we can put AI on? Or, and they see others' use cases and they try to bring them home and they can't really figure out how to take what they've seen and put it exactly in what they have. And so the question is, everybody says start with the low-hanging fruit. Is the low-hanging fruit a chatbot? Because everybody else has a chatbot, or is it to look at a core business process where there might be customer value, but where it's not immediately evident, where you can drag and drop a cloud service and apply it like an image recognition thing from Amazon? Where do you think is the right place to start? Is it with core business processes, or have you seen more success with customers that have tried more run-of-the-mill AI projects?
Run-of-the-mill AI projects. So
for us in the bubble, right?
So you've got to start with something that's tangible. You've got to start with low-hanging fruit that can build into a lighthouse to help the business understand, the opportunity going forwards. You bite off more than you can chew. You're going to get tied up in trying to define those business processes, choosing the right people, skills, etc. There's got to be a journey there. The strategy for CIOs, CDOs, CTOs is to think about, we start with this today, but where do we actually want to end up? What do we know? What's the potential? What's that journey that's going to get us there? And those business processes, we see a lot of people going, right, we'll build this, we'll get this team together, we'll bring on this great solution. Hey, we've produced something. What do we do with it now? If businesses start thinking about, okay, how do we actually, in conjunction with building the people and the process, the people and the tooling, how does the business come along in that journey? So it's not a hand it over, throw it over the fence. It's right, we understand where we're going to take this data coming out of these models. We understand how we work with it, what the value is. So getting the business as part of that journey early on, that's what I'd like to see more of.
Yeah. It's interesting that you said analyze the data. One thing that I'm going to be talking about a bit more later is treating data not as a byproduct of operations, but something that you create purposefully for the sake of controlling things and that kind of thing. So at H&M, you guys have made an incredible journey of codifying a lot of processes and lifting them into a platform that can automate them and that kind of stuff. How did you guys how did you come up with that, and how did you chop up the elephant, so to speak?
That's a good question. I think it is really chopping up an elephant. We've done it in multiple different steps. So the first step was really what I call sequence works. That we really started everything external. Because otherwise you can't tell the variables with reliability with this is not the way you do it. So we tried to do it with some key employees and really with the help of external partners in the beginning. Then when we had been able to prove the value that these use cases actually were possible to automate, then we started bringing in our own employees. Mostly, so replacing consultants with external people that already had the culture, and then using that as the embryo to then scale that into the organization.
But the codification of the processes, was that done entirely in the business and then handed over to the data scientists, or did you do it together, or did the data scientists guess and then verify, or how did that work?
It was very much a partnership. So it started with, as always, you need to do exploratory data analysis, but you also need to speak with business stakeholders. Yeah. The business stakeholders already had these are the processes that we follow. If the solution should have any value in H&M, then it actually needs to have this type of output. And then in many cases, what we realized was the run-of-the-mill type of models, they didn't perform very well. So they needed to have that combination of human intelligence and machine intelligence. So you needed to blend those two, and that's also why Octa has been out talking about this augmented intelligence rather than artificial intelligence. So we're augmenting humans because humans will be using the models, and we're augmenting their intelligence. And the combination of the two is really the best.
Right. What do you think, from your perspective, in terms of when you're codifying these business processes, and you have the potential, you see the potential in changing a core business process. You guys are involved in logistics. Maybe you want to offer a service that a customer thinks is super valuable that's difficult to execute on unless you're very automated, like same-day delivery or something like that. And then there's lower-hanging fruit, such as, document classification or something like that. That's maybe a little bit simpler to tackle, if not technically, at least because there's fewer people involved. It's just engineers or something. Where have you seen, the value in prioritizing one project over another? In terms of all the AI projects that you guys are doing, which ones, gain the most momentum, have the most effect, and that kind of thing?
So in my opinion, the key is to approach this problem using a domain-oriented model. So I think probably if the business problem overall in such a company, big, working on many different contexts, would be too difficult to be approached from a very high-level point of view, using domain-driven design, maybe using some methodologies like even storming, could help to segment the problem to separate domains, and then you can focus in isolation on specific subset of domain, infer relationships within domains, so understand how low-hanging fruits that would be easy to implement on a specific subcontext may be beneficial for another domain as soon as you can exploit the relationship implementation. So for instance, you mentioned the document processing, document recognition. Imagine that your customer brings to you the document that has been issued by his previous service provider. You can infer from that document some atomic information regarding the kind of contact that you established with, that the customer established with the previous provider. But you can also infer the way that the customer used to consume that service. And then you can predict using AI algorithm which will be the best strategical offering that you can provide them. So the next best offer, the next best action that on the logistic channel you can send to the customer, addressing a typical engagement phase.
I do think a lot of people underestimate how much you can chop up an AI challenge into smaller sub-challenges that bring value on the way. And they think that only a perfect solution is good enough. Or like you're talking about augmented intelligence, people think that if the AI can't do everything automatically by itself perfectly, then it's worthless. But it's not. You can have part-way goals that are also valuable. I wonder now if when we're implementing an algorithmic business, is it a top-down initiative or is it a bottom-up initiative?
I want to say it very consultancy that it depends on the client and their culture and the way they run their business. But I think you need buy-in from both sides. So you need executive buy-in sometimes, but you also need that initiative or need or feel for change to come from the business and for them to drive that. And you want them, I would say, involved very much in that process, so the end users to actually help design the solution.
What is it? What is required from the decision makers? Would you say it's C-level? Do they need to be involved? Do they need to know what's going on, or?
Maybe not from the beginning, but you want some type of sponsorship or commitment from someone that has that mandate to make that change. But I think if you want to drive a bigger transformation in your business, you want that C-level executive commitment or like sponsorship. They don't need to be hands-on involved.
Yeah, well, okay, but that's a good question. I mean, so let's say you get C-level sponsorship. Does that mean that they set the strategy, or more like they give you the go-ahead because this is part of our strategy? We've set aside 10% of our budget, go for it. And then you have you push down the responsibility and spread it out. Which one of those two approaches have you seen more of?
I think we see more that they push it down a bit. They sort of give the go-ahead or clearance, and then you set the vision or strategy that is aligned to the overall business strategy. But you can push that down a little bit to allow the people that maybe work more on this at a day-to-day or closer to the business of it. Allow them sort of that freedom.
Is that because that's a good strategy? Do you think is because it's a good strategy, or do you think that it's because C-level people maybe aren't always, don't have the vocabulary and the data literacy to help verbalize a strategy themselves?
I think it's a mix of both a lot of times. But as I said, it's like dependent on the business, on the customer, who they have on that C-level and how their background and their experience working with data and AI, etc.
Yeah. In the projects that you're involved in, what do you think is the differentiator in the successful and the non-successful ones in terms of executive buy-in, like the seniority of the buy-in of the projects, and also I'm going to throw in an oddball here. I've seen that projects that do well have spokespersons and evangelists, internal spokespeople and evangelists that aren't necessarily even assigned, just overly enthusiastic people that want to go around and show off and say, did you know we did this, and talking to people. So what kind of buy-in? I think your perspective as a software vendor is interesting. Is it bought in at the IT level, at the C level, and what difference does that kind of buy-in make in the projects?
Okay, so we call them champions internally, Every customer we work with, we need to have a champion in each project we're working on. You know, they're our internal sponsor. You know, they're also going to communicate and build the relationships up to the C-level. And, you know, I see it's a real mix. The C-level, if it's strong leadership, they're hiring really smart people to come up with the solutions to the strategy that they're defining, or help define that strategy. You know, it's not one or the other. They can feed into each other. But you've got to have that conduit in the middle. You've got to have people who can translate the solutions, the technical language, into the business language, and help the C-level understand what that strategy is really going to look like. They've got as tough a job as those who are on the ground who are looking for the solutions. So you've got to have that person in the middle. We work with those people. We work with the people on the ground, but we also work with the C-level. You know, and if it's a major change in strategy, you know, it could be a 5-10 year one they're looking at. They want the partners, they want the understanding, they want the ideas coming in from external consultancy partners, very much coming up through their business as well, and from vendors.
Yeah. I'm wondering the communication channel that exists between the different layers. One thing that I've experienced is that non-functional requirements, such as, you know, what your sensitivity to changes in sales predictions is, you know, just more business-oriented requirements that don't have anything to do with the thing that you're actually building, those things tend to be missed. And so you have a model that performs perfectly, but doesn't know, for example, what the cost of a loss is compared to the cost of a win. You would have to do 10 wins in order to offset one loss. And so the model's good, but it's not connected to the business operational reality. And a lot of times, the higher up you get, the more privy you are to the reality of the business model, and people down on the ground, you know, they have an intuition for it, but it's not codified. So how do you guys do so that those requirements are known by the data scientists, so that when they're implementing this algorithmic steering of stuff, that they're not naive and just, you know, maybe aiming for like model accuracy or something, but actually business accuracy, if you will?
It's super hard. It's super hard because to some extent you need to translate that as well. I mean, also when you do the POC, how do you know this kind of model performance will create this business value in production? Doing that sort of analysis requires a lot of sort of just basic analysis of what is happening with the data. But I mean, you can do analytics to support that. But going back to a big initiative that we're working on right now is trying to create a community, really blending people across the entire organization, both within different domains or between different domains. So both within a domain, between different domains, and tech to business as well. So everyone has the same vocabulary. So this concept of AI literacy and data literacy, everything like that, is super crucial. Because if you don't have the same vocabulary, you're going to talk you're not going to be able to understand each other. Like what you were saying as well, with sort of this model needs to perform. What does that really mean? Yeah, it's different for a business person versus a developer of the model. And also at what level you're at. And just understanding that complexity requires you to have spoken with some of these stakeholders.
The measurement of the success of a model, I think, depends a little bit on whether the higher up decision makers have sort of a stake in its success or not, or whether it's seen as an IT project. So in the AI projects that you're working on, are they viewed as like an innovation project, or is it viewed as an evolution of existing operations into the next century? I think the most fun analogy for me is, I don't think anybody thinks of themselves as an internet company, even though every company is affected by the internet. We rely on the internet. Like most companies, if they didn't have the internet, would probably be in big trouble. And it's going to be the same with AI. If the AI systems don't work in the future, we're all going to be in big trouble. But right now, AI is still viewed as a sort of a fringe thing, sort of like you used to hire a web developer to the side and be like, you make the design, the infrastructure, the store, and everything. And we're still doing that with the data scientists. And the question is, have you been able to sort of integrate that into the organization, or is it still innovation? How has that journey been like?
Well, it's a journey that it's still going on. So we are trying to exploit as much as possible relationship within different components of this of the overall pipeline, because if we want to develop something that is really innovative, we need to consider all the factors. So something that we are trying to define is an ubiquitous language in order to establish ubiquitous connectivity among all domains. We're also trying to define some sort of domain-specific language that would help to translate business requirement into physical implementation, because probably something that you have done so far. So computational and programmatic approach is definitely what I think is the key differentiator for this kind of opportunities. So from my point of view, this is still a long road ahead. It's quite challenging. I think the right way to measure the reliability, the effectiveness of this kind of solutions is a continuous feedback loop from the field. So you need to measure what has been the result of the models of that determined a certain business decision with the real effect that the business decision has provided. There are some use cases that we implemented so far, and in any case, what makes our model sustainable and self-evolving is collecting a continuous feedback loop.
That's awesome. Can you describe a little bit? You said that it's an ongoing process, and I think when we go to these kinds of events, a lot of people say we're data driven now. Done. No. The internet done, but. It's obviously, there's no like goal end game here. What does that mean for you? Like, because since you're saying it's an ongoing process, that means that once you get to a point, you think, okay, there's more we can do. There's other stuff we can do. What do you have to say to people that feel a bit hopeless in that there's no end game to it, and they feel like they're always trying to catch up? Do you guys feel like you're on beat, or are you catching up, or how does that work?
No, we feel that this road will never end, so probably it will be easier because we will accomplish better knowledge, better confidence, we will face mindset shift and organizational shift challenges, but we will pursue continuous improvement all the time.
Is the idea of being ahead or behind, is that meaningful? Does it make sense, or is it just...
It depends. From some perspective, yes, from others, no. So. In terms of transformation, there are some organizational changes that probably have some significant milestones that needs to be achieved. From a technical perspective, there is no milestone. I think it's a continuous improvement because technology changes every time. And so according with the changes of the technology's background, also the strategy must change in the same model.
That was a really nice insight. We're going to have to remember that one for later, the fact that there can be milestones in organizational changes. In technical changes, it's just continuous changes. I think that's interesting. We're going to have to focus on that again. I think one thing that would be interesting to hear from all of you is, again, at these events, we tend to hear of the success stories. And so I don't want to hear about failures necessarily, but I would feel it's interesting to share war stories, if you will, of stuff that's been tougher than what people imagine. I have a layman friend that was telling me he was so surprised. Aren't we further along? Doesn't everybody have AI deployed everywhere? And it's like, no, it's not that we don't have the tech, but there's significant challenges to going algorithmic business. What would you say is the biggest stumbling block that you tend to come across?
I think from my perspective, and what I also enjoy working with, I think it's not always or usually the technical aspects of it, it's the people aspects and the change and the culture. I think that's super important, and I think we've seen a shift over the past couple of years where companies are realizing that they need to take into account the culture and the end users and the business and make sure they're informed and they're knowledgeable and they can take all these insights in and actually make decisions on them. And not just treat it as a technical transformation. Because when you do that, like once you feel like you're done with the technical part and you are trying to implement it in the business, they push back and they say, this doesn't suit us. Like, what is this model? What is this output? This is not what we need or what we're asking for. And then you need to kind of go back and redo it. So I think it's the people aspect a lot of times.
Are people not used to thinking about data or not used to collaborating or not used to designing strategies? What do you think is the hardest people aspect?
I think it's just being comfortable with, understanding and using data and trusting the data, and that, that input, it can be useful for you, and that was rather the output from that is something, that you can use and you can trust that.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of times there's also, you're a bit hesitant, about the quality of data, what data is this based on.
Yeah.
So I think it's that, and that shift in understanding and trusting data that people need.
What about in your experience? Stumbling blocks?
Having siloed teams of resources, just like siloed teams of data.
Oh, that's interesting.
Some of the most...
Can you expand? What do you mean by siloed?
Okay, so separate data sets, clearly something that's close to our heart at Databricks. But actually looking from the people perspective, having siloed teams, like a data science team over here, a central IT team over here, some data engineers. We get to work with a lot of customers, we get great insight into how they're approaching it and the maturity levels. Some of the most successful ones are where they're building cross-functional teams. It's not, let's go and talk to the data science team, let's go and see what they're doing. Build a team around that business. Bring those resources together. Focus on that business problem.
No ivory towers, in other words.
Yeah. So a tribe type approach, I see companies referring it to, but think about embedding those resources in so they understand that part of the business. They're focused on the common goals.
Right.
That's where I see a lot more success, as well as focusing on what's achievable.
Right.
Working on something that's an achievable strategy.
Yeah.
Not again trying to scale the mountain in the first 6 months and then getting frustrated because they're not making progress, or they're spending a lot of money and they're asked to take a different approach.
Oh, but that's an interesting question. Cool, and I'll follow it up with you, Björn. Has budget ever been a stumbling block? It hasn't. That's not the problem.
No, I mean, we've had tremendous commitment from our founding family. So that has been extremely valuable. We've always felt this huge need to reorganize the stuff. I mean, we had an extremely successful business model.
Was that we had bought up Ruel's, which was a post-order company back in the 90s. That was the reason why we had a web portal at all. Otherwise, it was stores that we were scaling. So then we needed to first of all, use the web portal as a website. Then we needed to improve it so that we could do personalization. And now when we've improved it, we need to do it again because it wasn't good enough. It's a constant journey, right?
Yeah.
But the same thing is true for our supply chain.
Right.
So we had 2 different supply chains, different warehouses. And now we have to have an omni idea. The metaverse is coming, so now we also need to sort of integrate the shopping experience with the digital experience. And this is a huge transformation. And what is at risk is really that H&M will no longer exist. So naturally, there's a lot of investment in redesigning the organization from the bottom and up through all of these processes. So the AI initiative really within H&M is just a very, very small fraction of this whole business strategy. And it becomes really interesting when you start seeing that full picture.
Yeah. I'm going to ask the same question to you, and I think it was very fun to hear that budget is not a problem. That's my experience as well, because if budget is a problem, it's, and it isn't, but when it is, it's usually because the project is too big, and you can chop up the elephant like we've been talking about during this meeting and make it smaller.
Exactly.
The MVP, everybody, if there is an MVP with a good business case, the business case pays for itself.
Yes.
Yeah.
So what are the biggest stumbling blocks in your experience? Like what has been tougher than expected?
Well, the organizational changes, the mindset changes, because people need to be aware of why it's important to change, why it's important to pursue digital transformation, leverage more on data science with respect to traditional approaches, because the more they're aware, the more they are committed, and so the faster the transformation happens. So the budget definitely is not a problem, because every transformation is to handle the effort to transform the landscape. But In return, we would expect a faster time to market, more reliability of the data model, and the overall data infrastructure, because communication will be more loosely coupled and therefore more reliable, because the interface will be well agreed between domains and components. And therefore, everyone that needs to develop a new data model or exploit new opportunities from data could be leveraged on a consolidated environment where all the data have been certified and made accountable from the origin itself. So I'm anticipating some topics of the talk I will talk about later this morning. So it's a matter of organizational shift, because many companies, especially if they are big and they have people with heritage on traditional approach, traditional technology, may suffer of the change, may do not accept spontaneously the idea of doing something in a different way. So dissemination, explaining the methodology, explaining the value, demystify the effort in realizing a solution in a different way, using a different technology that never been used so far. So for instance, in Poste Italiane, we broke down the mainframe into domains on the distributed environment, not on the host. And so people historically working on COBOL and mainframe routines now are taking the ownership of distributed architecture, schedule and Kubernetes, developing microservices, leveraging on the implementation of streaming topologies, exchanges messaging using Kafka. So it's something totally different from what they've done so far, but they've taken ownership. We have decentralized the ownership of the data, not only at the operational level, but also at the business level. This is invaluable, because this provides a huge value in terms of reactivity of the data architectural landscape.
All right. Okay, well that cues the last question that we're going to have time with for today. And the question is going to be, is it better to move fast or to move efficiently? What do you think? I hope people have different answers. I want you to duke it out here. What's better?
Fight about it. I think it depends on how you define efficiently, but I would say to move efficiently.
Okay.
To ensure that that the changes you make are driven by value and are providing value to the business. And of course, can't be too slow, but I would say
both ideally. All right, cool.
Answer.
What do you say, Richard?
I'm going to go with fast.
Fast,
just to give a different opinion.
Awesome.
I'd say, choose that low-hanging fruit, that lighthouse project. Pick that solution where you can start working towards that goal immediately. And part of data science, I'm not a data scientist, but it's experimentation. It's moving quickly. So be fast, experiment, show the business what you can achieve. Still work towards a goal, but start showing the art of the possible, because then you get more executive buy-in, you get more budget, you get more commitments to change as well.
All right, cool. Björn, what do you say? Fast or efficient?
I'm going to use the African proverb. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go in a group.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, so I'd say in the beginning, you definitely want to go fast.
Yeah.
You want to prove something. You really have sort of a tight deadline to prove the value. But then after a while, you need to be able to scale, and then you need to be efficient and stuff.
In the beginning, move fast. Then get efficient. Okay, and what do you say?
Yes, I agree with him. So you have to prove the value of the action that you're trying to pursue it. So go deep first in a small context, and then refine when you have, after a retrospective, when you have more awareness of what could have done better, and then move wider and maybe slower, because you have more awareness of what should be done. Then you have defined policies, and you have refined the overall methodology, and then you can decide to move on a wider context, maybe slower and more efficiently.
Yeah, and the reason I came to think of this fast or efficient is because you were saying that that there's like a resistance to change sometimes, and I think people maybe think that everything needs to be perfect and correct and thought out, and there's no room for failure or anything like that. Before we can get started, everything needs to be sorted and right, and those people never get started.
Yeah, exactly.
They freeze in place.
Yes.
All right. I thought this interview was super fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm glad that we all had a little bit different perspectives here. It went to flow forward. I think the transformation to algorithmic business is something that's going to continue for a couple of years. Then we're going to be done with that.
If you say so.
Right? Good. But if case you're not done with it or you're looking to talk to somebody about it, I think the panelists here would all be interested in talking to you. And I will be seeing you all at the next event in about 15 minutes. Thanks for joining.